Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Re-Federalist Report. I am Brady, aka Warhamster. Joining me, as always, my constitutional mentor, good friend, Mr. Constitution himself, Douglas V Gibbs. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, as always.
And we are continuing our review of James Madison's notes from the 1787 Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia. We are doing this line by line, word for word, because there is no better way of getting to the bottom of what the original intent of the Founding Fathers actually was.
And I want to emphasize that real quick for the audience, because people, when I talk about being a constitutionalist, and people say, oh, so you've read the Federalist Papers. Federalist Papers are not a bad thing to be reading. They say, oh, well, you've read, the ratification conventions. Those are awesome things to have read. But Madison's notes is the foundation. This is where you go, because this is the actual discussions during the convention, the debates, and not all of it is rosy, and not all of it is what you expect. A lot of the recommendations and debates and suggestions shock you sometimes, and have a feeling, considering what you mentioned to me before this started, we might get some shocking stuff today.
Yes, I think we will. It's funny. It's once you understand how the sausage is made, the sausage tastes a little bit different. All right, with no further ado, let's jump in. When we last left off the discussion, we had Hamilton being very long-winded, trying to push for more of a national government.
Yeah, in other words, Hamilton being Hamilton.
Yes, and the vote that comes up is they're talking right here on the motion to agree to a clause that the rule of suffrage in the first branch, they're referring to the House of Representatives, ought not to be according to that established by the Articles of Confederation. Articles of Confederation was one state, one vote. The House of Representatives would be based on population. They're then now going to talk about how the second branch, meaning the U.S. Senate, should be determined the apportionment.
And this is very appropriate, considering right now we have a movement in the United States who's claiming they want to get rid of the United States Senate. So pay attention, kids. This is going to be important.
In other words, you're suggesting that Hamilton probably would have agreed with the Democratic Socialists of America?
He may have.
Yeah, the answer is yes, he would have. So the first guy to speak, before we get into him, it's a guy by the name of Mr. Ellsworth. It's Oliver Ellsworth of Connecticut. And I just want to talk a little bit about him.
Oh, yeah. You're a big fan, right?
Yeah. So thing to know about him, he was from Connecticut. I went to the College of New Jersey, which became Princeton. Helped found the American Whig Clio-Suffolk Society in 1777. And he was a state attorney for Harford County during the Revolutionary War, which is interesting. He's fighting in the war, and he's also going back home occasionally and serving as a attorney. So these guys are kind of citizen soldiers. He's a state judge in the 80s and becomes a delegate to the convention in 1787, which is where we are today. It says right here, he played a role in fashioning the Connecticut Compromise, which was brought by Roger Sherman of Connecticut, which is what we're going to talk about right now. The compromise between the more populous states and the less populous states. He's also on the Committee of Detail, which prepared the first draft of the Constitution. He helped influence ratification in Connecticut. He was one of the first inaugural senators from Connecticut once the Constitution was passed. Here's where it gets bad. He is the chief author of the Judiciary Act of 1789. This is where
your love comes from.
So
yeah.
If you've watched, anybody who's listening to me knows I'm highly critical of that. What it basically did is it gave the U.S. Supreme Court power to overturn state Supreme Court decisions that were contrary to the U.S. Constitution. However, the U.S. Constitution had the state Supreme Courts and the federal Supreme Court as co-equal. They debate this later on in this convention. They absolutely decide that, and that's why Article 3 is written the way it is. He turns around and passes the Judiciary Act of 1789, which should have required a constitutional amendment. So,
and understand, folks, something here. 1789 is the year that the Constitution went active. When people ask me, when did things start going off the rails, and I say before the ink was dry, I'm not kidding. This is a great example of that.
Well, even more so, the Judiciary Act of 1789 is the very first act ever put forth by the Senate. It was U.S. Senate Bill number 1. They didn't even wait for the ink to dry. Goes on, says Ellsworth served as a key Senate ally to Alexander Hamilton and aligned with the Federalist Party. He led the Senate passage of Hamiltonian proposals such as the Funding Act of 1790 and the Bank Bill of 1791, which gave us the first bank of the United States. Neither one of those acts were constitutional. He was also an advocate in favor of the Bill of Rights and the Jay Treaty, which was the peace with England. After Rutledge was appointed to be the Chief Justice, the Senate rejected that, so Washington nominates Ellsworth, and Ellsworth gets nearly unanimously confirmed by the Senate, which is always a bad sign. He had to resign in 1800 due to poor health, and the person who succeeded him was none other than John Marshall. So I am not a fan of this guy who's about to speak. Anything else you want to add about Ellsworth?
Yeah, I looked it up real quick because I remembered seeing something somewhere. Because for whatever reason, a lot of people that claim to be allies of the Constitution love Hamilton. They love the National Bank. They love this idea of judicial review. Thank goodness for judicial review, or else the federal government would, wait a second, that's an internal audit you just created. They're determining. I mean, think about this for a second. Through judicial review, the courts, which is a part of the federal government, determines whether or not the federal government is acting constitutional. That's like the mafia having an internal audit to make sure that they are operating legally, and then the government saying, okay, well, since you guys said so, it's okay. That's exactly what's going on here. And so one of the places that I love going to is constitutioncenter.org. But the beginnings of this organization was Cleon Skousen, but yet for whatever reason, the people they've hired, the staff there, go off the rails on certain stuff. For some reason, let me do it this way. Let me read the headline regarding the article written in 2024 about Ellsworth, the most underrated founding father. Underrated? And then, of course, the article actually praises his involvement in judicial review, the bank, and so on and so forth. And these are allies online. So I just want you to, and the reason why I bring this up is I want people to understand we have been taught a lot of things about our history because there's a certain narrative that has to be there. That goes all the way back to Hamilton. We live in Hamilton's America in many ways. And so the reason why I bring this up is I encourage you not to just accept what you see on the surface. Always dig. And one of the ways to dig is to get into Madison's notes, because sometimes the true face of some of these individuals appears quite a bit during this convention. Go ahead, sir.
Damn Yankees. All right, so Ellsworth's going to have some good stuff to say here, though. He moves that the rule of suffrage in the second branch be the same with that established by the Articles of Confederation, meaning one representative per state. Eventually, it'll be 2 representatives per state, but it's equal apportionment. He would get his way on this. He was not sorry.
And stop there just for a second. Now, someone says, well, if they originally wanted 1, why did they go to 2? And we'll get there in these notes, but it was because you don't want one person representing. There has to be the yin and the yang, so to speak. Go ahead.
Yeah, and when we talk about Reynolds v. Sims, we talk about that as well. If the states go back to, if the 17th Amendment gets repealed, you're going to get 2 representatives per state. And the idea is you want balance. And so a state like California, you're going to have more rural counties, and you're going to get a conservative state Senate, and you're still going to have a Democrat state legislatures. So ideally, they would, each with the balance would appoint one U.S. senator. So you get a Republican and Democrat coming out of states like California, Illinois, and all the other states that are dominated by one blue city. You'll end up with about 75 U.S. senators being conservative and 25 being Democrat. That's kind of what we're working towards. He was not sorry on the whole. He said that the vote just passed had determined against this role in the first branch. He hoped it would become a common ground of compromise with regard to the second branch. This is what he's doing, is he's pushing this Connecticut compromise that Roger Sherman had proposed. We were partially national, partially federal. The proportional representation in the first branch was comfortable to the national principle and would secure the large states against the small. Everything he's saying right here is correct. An equality of voices was conformable to the federal principle and was necessary to secure the small states against the large. That's what we've been saying from day one. He trusted that on this middle ground a compromise could take place. He did not see that it could on any other. And if no compromise should take place, our meeting would not only be in vain, but worse than in vain. To the eastward, he was sure Massachusetts was the only state that would listen to a proposition for excluding the states as equal political societies from an equal voice in both branches. What's he saying there?
Boy, Massachusetts was a problem from the beginning.
Damn the Yankees. I have to go on camera for a second, so entertain the crowd for just a moment.
You gotta run away from the camera. It's funny because I have a lot of things going on around me too. But anyway, welcome to the program. For those of you who have not been to this program before, we are going through Madison's notes line by line. And the reason why I am enjoying this is because Madison's notes was my, what's the right way of saying it? It was my epiphany that I had been taught wrong. I've always wanted to be a constitutionalist. The Constitution has always interested me, going all the way back to when I was a kid. But what I had learned by going to college libraries and looking things up was the academic version of the Constitution. And I thought I had it all figured out, like a lawyer. And then a friend of mine, my mentor, Tim Curlin, says, yeah, you're pretty good, but you're missing some key pieces here. Read this, this, and this. And one of the this, and this that he gave me to read was Madison's notes. And Madison's notes changed me forever.
Okay. My apologies. The others would risk every consequence rather than part with so dear a right. An attempt to deprive them of it was at once cutting the body of America in two, and as he supposed would be the case, somewhere about this part of it. The large states he conceived would, notwithstanding the equality of votes, have an influence that would maintain their superiority.
He's still on target here.
Mm-hmm. Holland, as had been admitted by Mr. Madison, had, notwithstanding a like equality in the Dutch Confederacy, a prevailing influence in the public measures. What he's saying there is the Netherlands was about 12 different provinces for the Dutch Republic, Holland being the biggest and most populous of them. And they would have, he's talking about the equality of the Dutch Confederacy. Holland actually had more influence than the others, even though they were given equal weight. And there were some issues with that, and there's a reason the Dutch Republic did not last forever. The power of self-defense was essential to the small states. Nature had given it to the smallest insect of creation. He could never admit that there was no danger of combinations against the large states. They will, like individuals, find out and avail themselves of the advantage to be gained by it. It was true that the danger would be greater if they were contiguous and had a more immediate common interest. Talking about Virginia, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania. Are they going to gang up on the small states? A defensive combination of the small states was rendered more difficult by their greater number. He would have mentioned another consideration of great weight. The existing confederation was founded on the equality of the states in the article of suffrage. Was it meant to pay no regard to this antecedent plighted faith? Let a strong executive, a judiciary and legislative power be created, but let not too much be attempted, by which all.
And that's key right there. Hang on just a second, because that ties into something that I've been saying for a very long time. They understood they needed something strong. The way I like to explain it for the average layman is what they had with the Articles of Confederation was a lamb. What they needed was a lion. But the problem is, if you give the lion too much power, it destroys all the people. So you need a strong lion that can be unleashed as a lion when it's time for that, yet at the same time restrained enough that it's not a danger to the people. And it was a balancing act. And that's what he's basically saying here. So, hey, this stuff needs to be strong, but not so strong that it creates problems. So it's once again, I'm not disagreeing with Ellsworth. And Ellsworth is an interesting guy because, like Hamilton, he's definitely got away with words. And like most systems that lean to the more government than what the Constitution calls for, they're very good at parsing the words and making tyranny sound good. And with the deception, and I'm not sitting here saying he's lying. I think he truly believes what he says, but at the same time, I think deep down, like Hamilton, but it's not giving us enough.
Well, what he says next is going to address that. So let me read this, and we'll finish your thought.
Okay.
He said, "He was not, in general, a halfway man, yet he preferred doing half the good we could rather than do nothing at all. The other half may be added when the necessity shall be more fully experienced."
Ah, there's the rub.
And in his case, before the ink was even dry, when he passes when he drafts the Judiciary Act 1789. But this is actually, that sentence is so powerful because, remember, Hamilton was arguing for a much, much stronger national government here at the delegation. He did not want to get his way at all. Then he goes out there and is the number one author of the Federalist Papers, arguing for the passage of the Constitution, for the ratification. So he'd rather get halfway there and then come in and fill in the gaps as soon as he got into power as a Treasury Secretary, rather than do nothing at all. And Ellsworth just let the cat out of the bag right here. I want to let that sit there for a second, because understand, these guys realize, okay, we can't get what we want, but let us get part of the way there. We'll just come in and fill in the gaps with stuff that you guys decided not to vote on.
Now, understand something else also, audience. 6 weeks before he started talking here, when they were approaching the beginning of this convention, every last one of these delegates, for the most part, would be in full agreement with this. But as this convention has developed, as it has proceeded, many of these, if not most of these delegates, are going, oh, wait a second, this isn't going to work. The states would never go for that. They've gone through this process over the last few, 4 or 5 weeks, I think we're in, right? About 5 weeks in. And they've gone through this process. And so they're developing this idea of a more limited government. Ellsworth hasn't. Hamilton hasn't. They've stuck to their guns. They still believe that this should be a national government. They don't dare say it, though, because they know around them, they see what's going on. They're not stupid. They realize what's going on, and they understand what the states would want and wouldn't want. And so they're playing a game with their words. They're stepping lightly. It's funny because I was talking about this with my wife last night about something that had happened. I can't remember what it was now, but I said, oh, they're setting the stage. Sometimes you don't get what you want, but you can set the stage. You start putting. Oh, I remember what it was. It was Kagan and Barrett. Before a congressional discussion regarding budget, they're saying, well, we need more money for security and more staff. And what they were basically saying is, A, we're under threat. Of course, the threats have been, for the most part, against Trump-appointed justices. That's beside the point. And and it's just, there's so much more on the docket. There's so much more coming in. So we need more staff. So we need more money for that. And I told my wife, they're setting the stage for packing the court, because see, they know they can't do it on the surface, because you know what packing the court means. So they have to set the stage, and they're like, oh, well, we're overwhelmed, and so that's why. And that's what he's doing here. He's setting the stage.
Yeah, well, the other thing about Barrett, going off topic here for a second, is she basically admitted that these physical threats to her life is impacting her voting. And that's just basically giving a license for the radical left to continue with their antics, realizing that extortion actually works. So Barrett made a mistake. Just want to read that last sentence again. The other half may be added when the necessity should be more fully experienced. This is where the necessary and proper clause comes in. This is Hamilton's blank slate of reading between the lines comes in. Well, now that we've actually put this into practice, we can start doing what we deem as necessary and not go through the entire amendment process whatsoever. This is the slippery sleight of hand right here.
Well, and it's interesting, you're getting back to kind of the way both sides, if you want to get into sides, looks at things. Necessary means one thing to one group, and necessary means something else to somebody else. Necessary to them means necessary to move forward to. Necessary to me means, well, necessary. It's either not necessary or it is. This is very enlightening, and I'm glad that we had the chance to go through this, because when I've gone through Madison's notes of the past, it's been years and years and years, and so I don't remember all the details of what I've read and how I took it before, but I don't remember the times before going through this, me looking at it the way we are today. Now, maybe it's because I've matured. There's been political world I've seen more going on or whatever, but this is very enlightening.
Yeah, I think these two sentences are two of the most powerful we've seen yet.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Next up, we're going to talk to Mr. Baldwin's going to talk to us. This is Abraham Baldwin from Georgia, and I believe this is the first time he's spoken. He says he could have wished that the powers of the general legislature had been defined before the mode of constituting it had been agitated. He should vote against the motion of Mr. Ellsworth, though he did not like the resolution as it stood in the report of the Committee of the Whole. He thought the second branch ought to be the representation of property, and that in forming it, therefore, some reference ought to be had to the relative wealth of their constituents, and to the principles to which the Senate of Massachusetts was constituted. He concurred with those who thought it would be impossible for the general legislature to extend, its carries to local state matters. So there's a couple things going on here. I'm not going to speak to the Massachusetts, because I haven't reviewed that in a while, but New Hampshire, where I live, their initial state Senate was not made up like one or two representatives per county. It was actually separated by tax revenue. So where I sit, the county I'm at right now was the wealthiest part of New Hampshire, and was getting more state senators, and that's what Baldwin is pushing for. He's also going to talk later about the right to vote only being among property owners, and there's an argument to be made there.
And Baldwin historically is looked at as being one of the people who, because he was originally against the Senate having equal vote. He later changed his vote, and many people, many historians, view that his change of mind was the beginning of the movement to make sure that the Senate, the Great Compromise, came about. The other thing that's interesting about Baldwin is, and this is just a little side note, a little rabbit trail, he's the first president of the University of Georgia.
The last sentence is different than the rest of the paragraph. He's already arguing for apportionment by money in the first part of it. Obviously, that wasn't going to sit too well with the poor states. Last thing he said is he concurred with those who thought it would be impossible for the general legislature, meaning Congress, to extend its carries to local matters of the states. Now, that's a big, big sentence there, because that's what we want. That's federalism right there.
Right.
All right, moving on. We were here on Friday, June 29th.
And real quick, there's two ways of looking at it. Well, it would be impossible for the general legislature to get involved in state issues, and half of them are going, Right. No one's going, yeah. Anyway,
All
go
right.
ahead.
We're going to go to Saturday, June 30th. Mr. Brearley is about to speak. Mr. Brearley is from New Jersey. This is David Brearley. He moved that the president write to the executive of New Hampshire, informing it that the business depending before the convention was of such a nature as to require the immediate attendance of the deputies of the state. At this point, New Hampshire was not in attendance. In support of his motion, he observed that the difficulties of the subject and the diversity of opinions called for all the assistance we could possibly obtain. It was well understood that the object was to add New Hampshire to the number of states opposed to the doctrine of proportional representation, which it was presumed from her relative size she must be adverse to. Small state would want equal representation, and he wants New Hampshire there to get their vote. Patterson of New Jersey seconds the motion.
Yeah. Now, let's talk about Brearley for a second, because one of your biggest problems with Ellsworth is he was one of the motivating factors behind judicial review. So was Brearley. Brearley was the judge that presided over the landmark 1780 case, Holmes versus Walton, which established an early influential precedent for judicial review. In other words, 7 years before this convention, he was already involved with moving judicial review forward in this country. So,
all right, Rutledge of South Carolina is going to speak next, talking about whether we should send a letter to New Hampshire. He says, I could see neither the necessity nor propriety of such a measure. They are not unapprised of the meeting and can attend if they choose. Rhode Island might as well be urged to appoint and send deputies.
I don't remember this, and that's hilarious. Anyway, go ahead.
Are we to suspend the business until the deputies arrive? If we proceed, he hoped all the great points would be adjusted before the letter could produce its effect. I mean, he's hoping, well, by the time they get here, we'll have decided everything. And the reason Doug's laughing about Rhode Island is Rhode Island's got an interesting history. They were the ones probably as much opposed to having a strong central government as anyone, mostly because it was a state that was made up of mostly smugglers. Mr. King then speaks. King is that's Rufus King, Massachusetts. Big state.
Yeah. Now, here's the thing about Rufus King. I always think New York, because later on he's in New York. He becomes a representative in Congress from New York, and that becomes his home. So I always crack up when that's said, because New York's what pops in my head. But go ahead, Massachusetts.
Yeah, Rufus King's the first carpetbagger.
Yeah.
So King says he had written more than once as a private correspondent, and the answers gave him every reason to expect that state, meaning New Hampshire, would be represented very shortly, if it should be so at all. Circumstances of a personal nature had hitherto prevented. A letter could have no effect. This means New Hampshire will get there when they get there. Interesting, when New Hampshire gets there, the two representatives that come are Nicholas Gilman and Governor John Langdon. I don't know if I've told you this before, Doug, but I am literally just a few houses down from the Governor Langdon house, the mansion that he lived in. That is literally my neighbor.
Interesting.
It's a fun mansion to go visit. I walk by it all the time going into downtown Portsmouth.
You walk to downtown?
Oh, yeah, I'm like a block away.
Oh.
This is the old, we're in the historical district. Where I'm sitting right here is a historical landmark. This house is. We're just, as is almost every single one of the neighbor houses. These are all 200-year-old colonial houses, and they take their history very seriously in this town. Meaning I cannot even change a window without the Historical Society's permission. Mr. Wilson wished to know whether it would be consistent with a rule of reason or of secrecy to communicate to New Hampshire that the business was of such a nature as the motion described. It would spread great alarm. Besides, he doubted the propriety of soliciting any state on the subject, the meeting being merely voluntary on the motion of Mr. Brearley, Massachusetts. Here's a vote. Sorry.
Now, notice Wilson's response. Whether he likes it or not, he says this. But the states would not go for it. And remember, I was saying this earlier. This is, as you're watching all of this, or you're going through all of this, a lot of these guys, what influences them is not necessarily their own evolution, but the states will never go for this. That is, and we've talked about this before on this show. That is a prominent question on the floor. But will the states go for
it? Hey, what's the point if they can't ratify it? And on this motion to send a letter to New Hampshire, the votes are no. The motion of Mr. Ellsworth resumed for allowing each state an equal vote in ye second branch. So this is going to be a long one from Wilson.
Now, you mentioned Rutledge earlier, and I looked him up while you were talking because I seemed to remember he was kind of on both sides in my mind on a lot of things. I couldn't remember why. The guy was South Carolina, so he was big time pro-slavery. He believed in a strong executive. But at the same time, he was against a formation of a smaller court system because the inferior federal court system, because he believed the state courts should be left alone by a federal system, and federal courts, it was none of their business to get involved in state legislative and legal matters. And so he is the voice that's kind of standing against this judicial review thing that's kind of floating around. And so I just want to mention that. So when you see these names, understand they're more than just a name. There's a lot going on here. And in the case of Rutledge, he's a little bit of a voice of reason there. But notice also he didn't get a chance to say much. Go ahead.
Well, James Wilson's about to say a lot.
And Wilson, he has some of the best quotes I have come from this man. Oh, he has a way with words, and he's very good at masking who he really is. Go ahead.
Mr. Wilson did not expect such a motion after the establishment of the contrary principle of the first branch, and considering the reasons which would oppose it, even if an equal vote had been allowed in the first branch. The gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Ellsworth, had pronounced that if the motion should not be acceded to, all the states north of Pennsylvania, one only would agree to enter general government. He entertained more favorable hopes of Connecticut and of the other northern states. He hoped the alarms exceeded their cause and that they would not abandon a country to which they were bound by so many strong and endearing ties. But should the deplored event happen, it would neither stagger his sentiments nor his duty. He's talking about will these small states join into this new, stronger government, or will it splinter if you try to take away their apportionment with a popular vote? If the minority of the people of America refuse to coalesce with the majority on just and proper principles, if a separation must take place, it could never happen on better grounds. The votes of yesterday against the just principle of representation were as 22 to 90 of the people of America. A little bit of a hint at democracy here. Taking the opinions to be the same on this point, and he was sure if there was any room for change, it could not be on the side of the majority. The question will be, shall less than 1/4 of the United States withdraw themselves from the Union, or shall more than 3/4 renounce the inherent, indisputable, and inalienable rights of men in favor of the artificial systems of states? There's a lot there, Doug.
Boy, talk about a guy that's critical of sovereignty.
If issue must be joined, it was on this point he would choose to join it. The gentleman from Connecticut is supposing that the preponderancy secured to the majority in the first branch had removed the objections to an equality of votes in the second branch, for the security of the minority narrowed the case extremely. They spent an awful lot of time settling the same issue we've been talking about for a long time, protecting the big from the small and the small from the big. This is how you protect minorities, people.
Yeah, and he almost sounds like some of the modern day politicians. Well, we got to be careful with the tyranny of the minority. The minority, that's what the republic is all about, is protecting the voice of the minority voice. And I know I've almost said it so many times that it's almost ringing in your ears. That was the whole point of in Federalist 10. James Madison explaining that when you have factions, the larger factions will control, they will take over. And if you don't want them doing that, the only way to make sure those larger factions are not controlling everything is to give the smaller factions enough voice that they can be set against each other. That's the whole point here.
Yeah, and that's the opposite of what democracy is. With these people yelling about democracy, if they think if they can get 50% of the vote plus one, they can basically tell the other 49% exactly what to do. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to what I was talking about last night about natural law. We have the right to life, liberty, and property, and the government does not have the right to take away our property.
And in a democracy, as Jefferson alluded to later on, 51% could take away the rights of the other 49.
Exactly, and that's a problem. Such an equality will enable the minority to control, in all cases whatsoever, the sentiments and interests of the majority. 7 states will control 6. 7 states, according to the estimates that had been composed, 2490 of the whole people. He's talking about the bigger, more popular states having, the bigger states having so much of the population they will control, but they don't. Even if the most populous states have 90 out of the 114, 7 states would be able to trump them. So we would not be giving the bigger states and the more populous people a voice.
Again, it sounds like a group from today. In a sense, he's saying, well, it wouldn't be fair.
Go on for that for a second. I've got to respond to something.
Well, he's got all kinds of things going on. I wanted to mention Rutledge a little bit more because Rutledge is an interesting person. John Rutledge, who we mentioned earlier, he was a fierce defender of Southern economic interests, and he championed a strong executive branch. South Carolina and Georgia, remember, if you go all the way back to the Declaration of Independence, were fierce defenders of their economic interest, and their economic interest revolved around what? Slavery. And so if there's a slavery argument going on that would make the 1619 people all happy, it is the fact that South Carolina and Georgia were indeed doing what they could to defend that. But they did it for economic reasons, not because of slavery reasons. It all tied into one. Now, that said, this, even though he had a pro-slavery advocacy, it was really about forbidding the federal government from interfering with their economic business. That was his aim while he was in this convention. And he believed in a strong executive because he believed that, because he feared that the northern states, or the states that the larger states population-wise, would use Congress to dictate terms. He feared that if Congress had too much power, they would stomp all over the smaller states and the southern states just because of their power and numbers. And so he was one of the staunchest advocates during this convention of the presidential veto. Now, and the reason why this kind of got my brain thinking is, what is the DSA today pushing for? Oh, we got to get rid of the Supreme Court, got rid of the Senate, we got to get rid of the president, and just have him appointed by the democratically voted in branch of Congress. So we were talking about how Ellsworth or Hamilton might fit in with the DSA. I tell you what, Rutledge, his head would be exploding over this. What we're seeing, what the DSA is trying to push. All right, go ahead, sir.
All right, James Wilson continues. It would be in the power of less than 1/3 to overrule 2/3 whenever a question should happen to divide the states in that manner. Can we forget for whom we are forming a government? Is it for men or for the imaginary beings called states? Very telling.
Now, when he says imaginary beings, I wonder if there was a little bit of condescending tone that went along with that part.
Yeah, I would imagine so. Will our honest constituents be satisfied with metaphysical distinctions? Ought they to be satisfied with being told that the 1/3 compose the greater number of states?
Now, let's stop here for a second. You got to understand something. A, you've got these nationalist-minded folks in this convention, many of them, all of them in the beginning. Secondly, this idea of states being entities, having a right to vote, having a right to have a say, this idea of states having sovereignty, this is something that's never really been accomplished or even attempted historically, except for maybe the 12 tribes of Israel. This is aside from the 12 tribes of Israel being basically independent but in a union, this has never been seen. So, and I can almost imagine these imaginary things called states, because this is something never done. What are you guys trying to do? This is outside the norm. Europe doesn't do this. I mean, I almost feel like that's what a lot of these guys may have wanted to have said, but they dared not. And and the reason why I'm saying this is I want the audience to really put themselves into this convention here. This is something never attempted. This is something that it seems these imaginary things cause it. And the idea that the states do have a voice, and they were having a voice, and that they had developed individually, not only was historically never really happened before, but it was frightening. Where they're going down a road that they've never seen before, but at the same time, that was the key. That was the key piece of this whole thing. Without it, it all collapses.
And Wilson from a big state, Pennsylvania, is arguing against it.
Oh, absolutely.
The rule of suffrage ought on every principle to be the same in the second as in the first branch, meaning population-based. Mm-hmm. What's the point of having two branches if they're representing the same, and
for those of you who hate the word democracy, the democracy ding, 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 ding should be going off in your head right now.
If the government,
this is a cry for democracy.
If the government be not laid on this foundation, it can be neither solid nor lasting. Any other principle will be local, confined, and temporary. This will expand with the expansion and grow with the growth of the United States. Much has been said of an imaginary combination of three states, sometimes a danger of monarchy, sometimes of aristocracy has been charged on it. No explanation, however, of the danger has been vouchsafed. It would be easy to prove both from reason and history that rivalships would be more probable than coalitions, and that there are no coinciding interests that could produce the latter.
Oh, again, we've never been down this road before, and you guys are telling me this could happen. Where's your proof? Well,
and it was pretty clear even at that day that the different economic systems between the New England states and the Southern agrarian was always going to have conflicts of interest.
And that gets back to Rutledge's fears, of the economic system down in South Carolina being influenced by this larger body.
And history would bear this out.
Yes.
The New England states would team up together to pass the tariff of abominations. The Southern states, of course, being the major exporters, are the ones that were punished by the protective tariffs, and it was not equal. And that's why the South, if the states hadn't had their rights, they wouldn't have been able to say no. That's why this argument is so fundamental to how the Federal Republic was supposed to be, and why they had to basically fight a bloody civil war to enforce the will of the Northeast faction. No answer has yet been given to the observations of Mr. Madison on this subject. Should the executive magistrate be taken from one of the large states, would not the other two be thereby thrown into the scale with the other states? Whence then the danger of monarchy? Are the people of the three large states more aristocratic than those of the small ones? Whence the danger of aristocracy from their influence?
And this is a technique that you see often in politics. To get across your point, you start asking ridiculous questions. Go ahead.
It is all a mere illusion of names. We talk of states till we forget what they are composed of. Is a real and fair majority the natural hotbed of aristocracy? Yes, it's called the tyranny of... Never mind. We've already said it too many times.
Oh, is Wilson getting under your collar a little bit?
Yeah, he actually is. It is a part of the definition of this species of government, or rather tyranny, that the smaller the number governs, the greater. It is true that the majority of states in the second branch cannot carry a law against the majority of the people in the first. But this removes half only of the objection. Bad governments are of two sorts. One, that which does too little, and two, that which does too much. It's a good point. That which fails through weakness, and that which destroys through oppression. Under which of these evils do the United States at present groan? And what he's saying is we right now have a government that does too little. It's not strong enough. He answers his own question under the weakness and inefficiency of its government. To remedy this weakness, we have been sent to this convention. If the motions should be agreed to, we shall leave the U.S. fettered precisely as heretofore, with the additional mortification of seeing the good purposes of ye fair representation of the people in the first branch defeated in the second. So the first branch, the House of Representatives, that's the one that represents the majority of the people. And even though they vote on good things, you're going to take it away because these imaginary things called states, these small little states, are going to take away our more populous votes, which is exactly what we want. It's called balance.
And again, also remember, folks, what we're also looking at here, and this brings me back to Rutledge from South Carolina. We're looking at industrial versus agrarian. That is a large part of what this is.
24 will still control 66. He lamented that such a disagreement should prevail on the point of representation, as he did not foresee that it would happen on the other point most contested, the boundary between the general and local authorities. He thought the states necessary and valuable parts of a good system. All right, that's quite a bit there, Wilson. And we have time. I need to read Ellsworth's rebuttal. The capital objection of Mr. Wilson that the minority will rule the majority is not true. The power is given to the few to save them from being destroyed by the many. If an equality of votes had been given to them in both branches, the objection might have had weight.
Stop right there. He said, hey, if we did this like we did with the Continental Congress or the Confederation Congress, where it was the entire body, then maybe I could, but that's not what we're doing here. We're going to give democracy to one and equal vote to the other. So so what Ellsworth is doing, right, wrong, or in between what you think about the guy, he's correct in what he's saying. Hey, what we're doing is we're creating a balance here. They're going to naturally offset each other.
Yeah, he makes a really strong point here. Is it a novel thing that the few should have a check on the many? Is it not the case of the British Constitution, the wisdom of which so many gentlemen have united in applauding? Have not the House of Lords, who form so small a proportion of the nation, a negative on the laws? as a necessary defense of their peculiar rights against the encroachments of the commons? No instance of a confederacy has existed in which an equality of voices has not been exercised by the members of it. We are running from one extreme to another. We are raising the foundations of the building when we need only repair the roof.
That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah. No salutary measure has been lost for want of a majority of the states to favor it. If security be all that the great states wish for, the first branch secures them. The danger of combinations among them is not imaginary. Although no particular abuses could be foreseen by him, the possibility of them would be sufficient to alarm him. But he could easily conceive cases in which they might result from such combinations. Suppose that in pursuance of some commercial treaty or arrangement, three or four free ports and no more were to be established, would not combinations be formed in favor of Boston, Philadelphia, and some port in the Chesapeake? A like concert might be formed in the appointment of great officers. He appealed again to the obligations of the Federal Pact, which was still in force, and which had been entered into with such solemnity, persuading himself that some regard would still be paid to the plighted faith under which each state, small as well as great, held an equal right of suffrage in the general councils. His remarks were not the result of partial or local views. The states he represented, Connecticut, held a middle rank.
I want to say something that's interesting, because as you watch Ellsworth and you're like, well, don't like him here, I like him here, don't like him there, like him here. And a lot of the founding fathers, that's the way they were. And I want to warn the audience, you have been trained to believe it's right and left. Big government versus small government. That's all there is. And when it comes to the founding fathers, here's what you recognize. And this is something that I've been talking about for years and years and years, for decades, is for them, it was different variations and different degrees of different things. There's a lot of the founding fathers that I like a lot in some instances, I can't stand in others. There's a lot of them who they're close, but not quite there in their thinking, and so on and so forth. This is the way it was, and they understood this, and they were statesmen about it. It was not two sides, and that was that. And I think listening to Ellsworth, like, we pick up on that a little bit. Quite often, Ellsworth or Wilson will say things and go, "Whoa, that was awesome. So why is he such a bleeping stinky stink on that?" And that was the founding fathers. And they understood debate. They understood what it means to be a statesman, and they had their positions, and they fought for it, and then they compromised. And I think I wish today's political establishment could take a lesson from that. I really do.
Yeah, I'm glad we focused on Ellsworth today, because he had he really got to see a really good illustration of what the issues were of that day and how they impact everything today. We started with Articles of Confederation, which allowed equal proportionment to every state, so the small states really could bully around the big states, the more populous states. We moved to a compromise, which is what we came out of the Constitution with, where you had the House of Representatives is basically representing the people, and the states have an equal apportionment in the Senate, and that's where we're supposed to get the balance. We've lost that in 1913 with the 17th Amendment, and there's a reason Congress is so dysfunctional right now. They didn't quite recognize that danger of this would morph into two national political parties or one and a half uniparty. But they hinted at a lot of these issues with, you can't give all the power to the populous states, and you can't give all the power to the small states. We have lost it.
And not just that, but also there's always got to be this valve there to make sure, this oversight kind of thing. But who do you give oversight to? And the problem with today's politics is we go, okay, well, the oversight are the courts, or the oversight is Congress. Or the oversight originally was the states. and the people. And that was the whole point. Part of the point of the Senate also was to make sure that the states had a hand in everything that was going on. It's no accident that it takes the states to ratify an amendment. It's no accident that it takes the states, fill in the blank. And that the same thing was going on with the Senate. And ultimately, that's what came out of it. And what we've done in today's push for democracy is we've removed the states from the equation. And the states were the stabilizing factor in the whole thing. And the forces against the Constitution understood that early. This is the reason for judicial review. This is the reason for implied powers. This is the reason for all of these things that were going on. And it was all preparation to eventually remove the states from the equation like they did with the 17th Amendment.
And it's important to remember what they feared the most, and that was an authoritarian central government. Mm-hmm. And the opposite side of the spectrum was pure anarchy with 13 colonies doing their own thing. They'd end up fighting against each other. Right. And we wanted to keep everything together, but how do we keep this new government from becoming tyrannical? And your number one protection against tyrannical central government is supposed to be the states. This is why the federal government has worked so hard for more than 200 years to wither away the strength and power of the states. And that's why we say for states' rights, that's exactly why. We want our states to be able to be our check and balance against the tyrannical federal government or the dangers of democracy.
And they got their excuse to clamp down on the states when a bunch of them decided they didn't want to be a part of this anymore. It was a bunch of BS. We're out of here, and they seceded, and there was a war between the states. It gave them those forces that have always wanted to get rid of the states' voice the excuse to clamp down on the states. How dare you misbehave, states? We got you now.
It was not a war between states. It was a war between two different confederacies. They are a separate nation. The Confederacy was. The Union invaded. It was a war of empire. It was imperialism. It was a small faction. Lincoln won with 41% of the popular vote, deciding we're going to impose our will upon these southern states, forcing them to secede because they could not live under that yoke, and then doing everything they could to provoke one incident and justify raising of the militia and an invasion of a sovereign nation.
So are you saying that a smaller faction that used the perception of power were able to take control of the country, sort of like, the Bolsheviks? Not that I'm making any comparisons.
Hey, Hamilton was the very first socialist. Lincoln was the first communist. All right. Last
thing. So my wife finished reading the book by Brian McClanahan, the 9 presidents who screwed up America, and 4 that I think it's like 4 that helped us. And she says to me, "Now I understand." I said, "What? Your dislike for Lincoln?" Okay, I recommend the book, The Real Lincoln, by Thomas J. De Lorenzo. It's not a bad read either. Don't get me wrong, though. Like all of our other personages in history, this is not a one side or the other. Lincoln was very good at having some great quotes. I think in many ways he meant well. I think in some ways that he was a man that wanted what was best for the country. But then again, as I like to remind everybody else, and I have said this a number of times on this program, don't forget C.S. Lewis, of all tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. Thanks for spending the time with us.
Well, we're going to stop there because Madison's about to go on a really long rant on the exact same subject, so we'll pick it up from there.
Oh, absolutely. And thanks for spending the time. DouglasVGibbs.com. Definitely pay me a visit. My books are not on the site yet. I'm still working on trying to get my leadership at the site place to put all my books on there. I'll talk to you about that later, Warhamster. And be sure to check out my latest book. And this show, I think most of the books are being sold because of you listeners. And for those of you who are like, what are you talking about, Doug? I put out a book called The Constitutional Presidency of Donald J. Trump. And I've been advertising it as being, I go over every accusation of him acting unconstitutional and then explaining why he either was in line with the Constitution or in line with what was intended. And then one of the readers got the book. She says, Doug, wonderful book, but why didn't you get into the Department of Education? Okay, fine. Every accusation of unconstitutionality except for what he wants with the education. Okay, left one out. But I think you'll enjoy the book, Constitutional Presidency of Donald J. Trump by Douglas V. Gibbs. Check it out at Amazon. And hopefully you enjoy it. And if you do buy it at Amazon, be sure to go back to Amazon, put in 5 stars or whatever. It helps give the book more recognizability on the site. They put it out there more, whatever the search engine optimization kind of thing is. And so I would appreciate it. And of course, drop me a line to tell me what you think of the book. If you go to douglasvgibbs.com, there's an Ask Doug link in the link bar. And if ever you have questions of any kind, you can ask me right through that link. And as always, Warhamster, thanks for having me on.
Till next week, everybody. Cheers.